This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. I honestly don't know where to start with this one. The research that I was doing today led me to this photo of Doria Raglan. Now, I know we've all seen this photo before, but I think it's worth talking about now. So today, I wanted to take the time to read this 100-page document that the State Department put out there on the capital of 21st century communism and how we arrived at this destructive ideology infecting the United States. And all I could think about is how Harry and Meghan came over here and pretty much funded various groups who are tied to this destruction of the United States from within. I didn't even get past the first page before my mind started thinking about how Harry and Meghan apply to this. And then the first thing that came up after I read to the fourth paragraph here, since the 1960s, the regime has served as the beating heart of a new and distinct kind of Marxism. This photo just popped into my head. So I had to go back and look at this. And let me tell you, I'm so glad that I did, because now with a fresh set of eyes, we're starting to see things that we didn't see the first go around. Now, the reason why I remember this photo was because there was another photo that showed Doria looking like she was part of some Black Panther movement. Back to this paragraph, it says here, the Cubans devoted themselves to recruiting, cultivating, and mobilizing a global coalition of activists, intellectuals, and political groups around this cause, building a sprawling revolutionary network that shaped a disproportionate share of America's most famous and influential extremist movements, from the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground through to Antifa. Today, the network continues to maintain ties to powerful leftist nonprofits, anti-ICE collectives, socialist groups, and Marxist militant organizations across the United States. Now, I'm not going to go through this report today. I still need time to digest all this information, because there are a lot of parallels that I'm seeing with what Meghan and Harry were doing, especially Meghan and her family in the very beginning. And this is why this photo of Doria and her afro has been ringing alarm bells inside my head. So the first time I recall seeing this photo was from an article that came out back on November 11, 2017, before Harry and Meghan got engaged. And that is a super important detail. This article that was published on November 11, 2017, with the headline, "The Look That Hooked Meghan's Dad," the charming high school photos of the woman who could be Prince Harry's mother-in-law, showing the sweet eyes and afro that Ms. Markle thinks made her father fall for her. Written by Caroline Graham. Yes, the same Caroline Graham who was responsible for publishing those staged photos that ruined Thomas Markle's relationship with his alleged daughter. Let's all not forget how Thomas Markle Sr., Samantha Markle, and Tom Jr. all blame the media for ruining Thomas Markle's chance to go to this wedding. But I digress. The point that I'm trying to make here is that this shows that Thomas Markle was working with Caroline Graham before the whole scandal broke. This was all planned, and I've said this before, Thomas Markle was never supposed to go to that wedding. We now need to revisit this article because the signs were there. Fresh-faced and full of hope for the future, she could, surely, never in her wildest dreams have imagined that her daughter would one day grow up and fall in love with a prince. This is Meghan Markle's mother as a teenager with captivating looks, seen in an enchanting photo published for the first time here today. Doria Raglan was just 16 and an outstanding pupil at Fairfax High School in Los Angeles when these pictures were taken for the school yearbook in 1972. Her life then revolved around her studies, listening to Marvin Gaye and fun-filled nights at a local Mexican taco joint with friends. But just 7 years later, Doria would fall head over heels in love with Thomas Markle, a handsome Hollywood lighting director 12 years her senior. Meghan has previously said of their romance, "I like to think he was drawn to her sweet eyes and her afro, plus their shared love of antiques. Whatever it was, they married and had me. Yay!" The pair married in 1979, and 2 years later, their beloved only daughter Meghan was born. If speculation proves to be correct, Meghan may soon be engaged to Prince Harry, her boyfriend of the past 18 months. So 18 months from this article dated in November of 2017 would have put them at May 11, 2016, which confirms the earlier reports that Harry and Meghan were dating in May. And we all know that at that time, Meghan was still dating Corey Vitiello, or at least that's the narrative that we were told. Harry has already met Doria, most notably at the Invictus Games in Toronto in September. For friends of Doria who remember her as a whip-smart member of the school's Apex Club, a class for exceptionally bright pupils, the notion that the young girl who loved flares and fashion is now mingling with the royals is a modern-day fairy tale. Given what we've been told about Doria, does she strike you as someone who was a go-getter and someone who was particularly bright in school, who just wanted to study all the time? So then this had me thinking, did Doria graduate high school? The only way to find out is to go look at the yearbooks themselves. The only place that has a copy of the 1972 Fairfax High School yearbook is classmates.com. Looking at this cover compared to the rest of the yearbook covers, this one stands out. And it's screaming to me, Black Power movement, right? Anyway, this is the 1972 yearbook. And there you can see that there is Doria. Now, from what I gather, Fairfax High School in their yearbooks only have pictures of sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And in this photo, Doria is a sophomore, which is 10th grade. So that would mean, logically, she would have graduated in 1974. Did Doria take a school picture for her junior year? Let's find out. Her name would be on page 42. Let's see. Nope. Ragsdale, Rakin, Ramirez, Ramos, Rangel. I don't see Raglan. Do you? Maybe she missed picture day that year. Let's take a look at 1974. Surely she would have her senior picture in there. As you can see, Doria is nowhere to be seen. Interesting, huh? Normally they would list if there were people missing. So Doria's name is nowhere to be found, not only in 73, but also in 74. Another really interesting thing here is, that Apex Club that Doria was a part of, for the particularly brilliant students, seen here, only 12 people. The group doesn't seem to exist in other yearbooks. You all know where this is going, right? So this photo does exist in the 1972 yearbook found on classmates.com. But here's the problem with this. This photo has 10 names listed, but there are 12 people in this photo. Another glaring issue here is that all of those people standing with Doria in the bottom row are nowhere to be found in the 1972 yearbook. Only 5 names have been able to be found and accounted for, as you can see here in my little mapping. So you all know what that means. Let's go back to Doria's class, where we found her sophomore year. Normally, you would see a progression of the same students year after year. You get to see them graduate. These students, technically, if they did everything that they should have, should be featured in 1974's yearbook. Okay, let's take this example of where Doria's name would have been senior year in 1974. This is definitely her class because I've cross-referenced the 1972 yearbook with the 1973 yearbook and the 1974 yearbook. As you can see, what I found were a lot of inconsistencies as well as suspicious errors that make you think that perhaps maybe the 1972 yearbook with Doria was planted. Let me go ahead and show you some examples. Okay, so to help you understand what you're looking at, I've kind of simplified this for you. In 1972, the one with Doria, I cross-referenced with the 1974 senior photos. So wherever you see those green check marks, know that that was cross-referenced between 1974 and 1972. And I did the same cross-referencing between 1973 and 1974. So wherever you see the gray check mark, you know that that is 1973's cross-checking against the 1974 yearbook. So wherever you see a gray check mark and a green check mark together, know that they've been cross-checked and that both yearbooks do coordinate with the 1974 yearbook. But where you don't see two of those check marks, that's where it starts to get murky. So going back to this, right off the bat, when you look at Doria's row, the whole row is practically unfilled with any kind of cross-referencing or checking out with those people in 1973 or 1974. So that, to me, is a big red flag. Now, the question marks that I have on here represent, I don't know whether or not they graduated, because they were seen in both sophomore and junior year, but not in senior year. So maybe something happened to them in making it to graduation. Like, look at this mess. In 1972, you have M. Parker, who is a blonde, and you can see that she doesn't smile. In 1973, M. Parker looks almost exactly the same. And then in 1974, you have Mandy Parker, who would fit in there where M. Parker would be, who has a completely different face and dark hair. But then let's look at the Asian guy. You have Mr. Park, who is Asian and a male in 1972. He's Asian and a male in 1973. But then all of a sudden, in 1974, becomes Ms. Park. Still Asian, but now female. My favorite one, though, is S. Phillips. In 1972, she starts off white with some nice straight wavy hair. Then in 1973, you start to see it frizzen, and then in 1974, she goes full-on black. It's not even the same girl. Stephanie Phillips, S. Phillips. I mean, you can see what's going on here, right? And the last example that I have for you, I think it's fairly obvious. Where Doria was as Ragland is now in 1973 as Ragsdale, and then in 1974 doesn't even show up. So I think we know what went on here. At least that's what I believe now. I think by now, if you can't see how this was a complete psychological operations, then, I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, explain this. Explain why every single thing with the Markles and Meghan is always so murky. There's never anything that's straightforward. The only explanation for all of these inconsistencies and contradictions and lies is that the whole thing is a scam. It's a lie. So now that you have all of this with the yearbook, let's get back to Caroline Graham's article, because the next part now should tell you that this whole thing was set up from the word go. Doria, who was nicknamed Dodie at school, was a beautiful girl inside and out, recalls Jennifer Caldwell, 61, a retired pharmaceutical company executive. Now, how many of you knew that Doria's nickname was Dodie? At this point, it's safe to assume that this is bullshit, but the fact that they're exploiting Diana and Dodie in such a way, and they've been doing it from day one, slowly injecting these little things, being like, oh, the stars are aligned. Everything just fits so perfectly. When you look back, you realize this was all part of the psychological conditioning. It wasn't just Meghan who was exploiting Diana. The Markles were doing it too, in very subtle ways. And this right here was a perfect example of that. Looking back at all of this, it's so gross what these people did. It really is. But anyway, let me continue on. She had this beautiful afro hairstyle she was so proud of, and she was always into fashion. She was always smiling, whip smart and sociable. After she passed her driving test, she would borrow her mother's car, and we'd go to places like Tico's, a cheap taco place which had long queues. We didn't have much money, but we had fun. Doria's father, Alvin, ran an antique shop, and her mother was a nurse. The modest family home was in a black middle-class area of Los Angeles. So now pay close attention to this part. It was a different era. We were innocent. Ms. Caldwell recalls, we listened to a lot of Marvin Gaye records. We had boyfriends, but we would never dream of having sex with them. It wasn't like that. It was a political time. Nixon had just been voted in as president, but Dodie and I were more into studies. That's what I remember most. Working hard and getting an education was what our parents, especially our mothers, focused on. They hadn't had that freedom. I don't know if I can believe that because from the looks of it, it doesn't look like Doria graduated. Now, this next one is kind of like an oxymoron. We just got done talking about how whip smart Doria was and they were studying all the time. But it says here, after leaving school, Doria, now 60, worked as an air stewardess, then as a makeup artist, which is how she met Tom Markle. Look, I'm not knocking those that go off to work for the airlines, but here they're making it sound like Doria was some rocket scientist. Look, if we are to believe these narratives that we were force-fed in the beginning, then how is it this whip-smart woman ended up in bankruptcy or disappeared for like 10 years? I'm telling you this now, this whole story is a lie. And I'll even go as far as to say that I bet Doria's not even related to this woman we're calling Meghan Markle. I bet Meghan's not even black. I mean, at this point, what evidence do we have aside from these propagandists telling us? None. None. At this point, nothing they say can be taken as truth. Nothing. Let me quickly finish this. It says, the 6'4" bear of a man was already a success in Hollywood, working as a lighting director on hit U.S. television shows. Now 73, retired and living in Mexico, he is also seen on these pages for the first time. The picture is from his 1962 yearbook when he was age 18 at Newport High School in the working class town of Newport, Pennsylvania. He was heavily involved in school plays and is listed as a member of the drama club, choir, and journalism club. In the caption next to his photo, he lists his interests as old cars, hunting, and reading before adding the catchphrase, "The show must go on." So I went ahead and checked all the yearbooks, and that information does pan out about Thomas Markle. What's interesting, though, we know that Thomas Markle had two brothers. Neither of those brothers are seen in any of those yearbooks. So my question is, were those brothers real? You know what I mean? I feel like this is the only truth that we have is that Thomas Markle was a lighting director. And it just went from there. It's kind of interesting that the woman that he's paired with wanted to be an FBI when she grew up. Okay, like he wanted to be a stage technician and this woman wanted to be part of the FBI. Go figure. Another thing that I found digging through those yearbooks was this comment. When Thomas was a sophomore in high school, this senior, pay attention to the name, Vonnie Louise Cedar, says, "I will my majorette uniform to Tom Markle." Huh? Sounds a little kinky, huh? But interesting that her name is Vonnie. Who else do we call Vonnie? Oh, that's right. Samantha. Or what is she calling herself these days? I mean, seriously. Vonnie Louise Cedars. I will my majorette uniform to Tom Markle. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions there. I'm amazed at how we all believed this story. Like, you look back and you read some of these articles and you're like, how did we not see this? But at the time, remember, this is what Harry and Meghan and this whole machine did. They saturated the media to where your head was spinning. You couldn't possibly absorb everything and then think rationally about it because look at how they had us in so many different directions. But getting back to this report, I highly recommend that you check it out because it does go over some things that are parallel to what Harry, Meghan, the Markles all were doing to us in a very subversive way. And they talk about the amount of spies that they had in the United States, making it look like they were all American, patriotic, conservative. But on the flip side, they were going back and giving intelligence to Cuba. Like, it is mind-boggling. And when you look at some of these people, they're not like the traditional guerrilla warfare people that you would see in the jungle. They're like politicians, your neighbor. Seriously. Like, check this guy out. Let me tell you this quick story from this report. This is Walter Kendall Myers and Gwendolyn Myers. This guy, Walter Kendall Myers, was the great-grandson of Alexander Graham Bell. Raised in privilege, he was educated at Brown University and Johns Hopkins, where he earned a PhD. He taught as a professor at SAIS and worked his way up through the ranks in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. providing him with access to some of the most highly sensitive intelligence in the U.S. government. He was 72 years old when the FBI arrested him. He had been a Cuban intelligence agent for 30 years. Myers was recruited by Cuban intelligence after his trip to Cuba in 1978, which he made at the invitation of a Cuban official at the Cuban mission in New York. On the island, Cuban intelligence had made contact with Myers and assessed his viability as an asset. Roughly 6 months later, a Cuban official traveled to South Dakota, where Walter and Gwendolyn were living together, and recruited them both as a pair to serve as clandestine agents of the Cuban government. The couple married in 1982. Cuban intelligence subsequently directed Myers to pursue a job at either the State Department or the CIA. Over the next 30 years, he and his wife passed classified information through shortwave radios, dropped packages in the supermarket shopping carts, and met with handlers while traveling to Cuba under false identities. In 1995, they were secretly flown to Cuba and spent 4 hours in a private meeting with Fidel Castro himself. When the FBI launched an undercover sting in 2009, Myers was recorded telling an agent he believed to be a DI handler that he wanted to resume his work for Cuba, saying, "I was actually thinking it would be fun to get back into it." He pleaded guilty in November 2009 to conspiracy to commit espionage and 2 counts of wire fraud. On July 16, 2010, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gwendolyn received 81 months. Gwendolyn died in 2015. Walter Myers died of cancer in March 2026 at the age of 88 in the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. He was unrepentant to the end. At sentencing, Myers told the court that their only objective was to help the Cuban people defend their revolution. Well, given the fact that Thomas Markle Sr. had bashed Trump in an interview, I think with Piers Morgan early on, nobody was really paying attention to that. But now when you go back and you look at some of these things, and when the Markles choose to insert themselves and when they don't, and who they were aligned with, especially Caroline Graham, I think it's becoming fairly obvious what is going on here, or what has been going on here. And I've been saying this for a while now, but now hopefully you guys see a little bit more as to how this whole thing was a charade. One big fat charade for Harry and Meghan to come over here to undermine this country. And I'm telling you this right now, Meghan and Harry are the 2 most anti-American people on earth. Did Meghan, who's supposed to be American, which I don't even believe that she's American at this point, did they say anything about July 4th? I mean, this was the 250th anniversary. It's like a pretty big deal. That would have been another way to keep herself relevant. I mean, think about it. This woman inserts herself everywhere else, but this was the one time where it would have made sense for her to, say something. But she didn't. There were rumors going around that Meghan was vacationing in Europe, perhaps, but one would think, why wouldn't you be here in the United States for this monumental moment in history that your children could have experienced? That's if you believe that they really do have children. Now, I believe that they have 2 children in their possession, but I don't believe that they are genetically tied to them. That's my opinion. But in any case, if we're supposed to believe this narrative and go along with it, wouldn't you think that you would be talking about what you did with your children on July 4th, There was no, gross concoction to celebrate George Washington. Which I find is strange for Meghan, since she has to be inserted everywhere, but this was the one time she chose to stay away, which leads me to believe that she really does hate this country. And I do believe that she is anti-American and has been subverting this country. My only hope is that her and Harry end up like Walter and Gwendolyn Myers. Both deserve to be behind bars, in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Definitely let me know your thoughts about this video. Leave your comments below, and as always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye! It was such a fraud.